A lot of good thinking. One immediate reaction was on this procurement. Do you think it would be possible to design a kind of rule saying that 7% of all public procurement in the European Commission should be going to rapid prototyping with SMEs?
So there's two parts about your question. One is SMEs and rapid prototyping.
Yes.
I think speeding up with prototyping is really helpful. And I think SMEs, as a practical matter, can often be the ones that can move the fastest. I don't know enough about procurement in the EU to know if setting aside a certain percentage is the best mechanism. One mechanism that I know about that I think has worked very effectively in defense and intelligence circles in the US was, of all things, the creation of a venture capital fund called InQtel, funded by the CIA, intended to bypass Pentagon procurement regulations for SMEs, particularly in software and cryptography technologies, where small groups of people were often doing very advanced cutting-edge work, but their investors were saying, stay away from selling to the government. And so instead, this new venture capital firm became a channel to bypass all those regulations. And indeed, in many cases, InQtel invested as a VC along with other VCs. So you also got the leverage effect of other capital being channeled into supporting these technologies. So that would be even a different mechanism from the 7% mechanism.
InQtel would be very interesting to have in Europe. But coming back to California, do you think the question is as follows? Why did you start to work with open innovation? Was it a kind of contextual observation of Silicon Valley, or was it driven by some other issues?
So I have to confess that I've not always been an academic. Before I went and got a PhD, I actually worked for a number of years in the computer industry. In a company that made hard disk drives. This was back when that was a good industry to be in. It's less exciting now, I have to say. But as a former manager myself, I found that the things that I was experiencing in my company and the things I was reading that were coming out of academia, to me, seemed quite separate. And so as I determined to go back and become a professor myself, my goal was to try to reduce that gap. And so indeed it involved a lot of close observation of companies, initially ones that I knew, but then like with Philips, companies I came to learn about. And as I got to see more and more companies in different parts of the world having success with this very different, more open model, it got very exciting for me.
So how do you see then this issue of that public, this is a conflict that I would like you to address, the conflict of public administration versus public innovation?
Well, we just sat in a lunch where we had Mind Lab from Denmark presenting about a very user-based co-creation model of public sector innovation as opposed to administration. I think that in the administration, the public sector plays a critical role both in mobilizing resources, but also in ensuring the delivery of services from those resources to the citizens. It may not be the case that the public sector always has to be the one providing the service. It may be, as in the case of open data, if they publish the data, citizens themselves and small companies can often add to what's being provided and help with the actual provision of it. One of the Mind Lab projects we heard was when they were trying to reduce costs of caring for infirm people in their homes, and by giving them more help on their health, these people were able to do more of things for themselves, so it actually reduced the total public spending while increasing the well-being of the individual. So that was a nice example where the innovation overcame a more traditional view of administration.
Before I would like to invite you to ask questions as well during the next 8 minutes we have, but I have one for the financial community. How would it be to apply open innovation to develop the next generation of currency beyond euro?
So let's see. I would start by saying one interpretation of the crisis we find ourselves in now could have been the result of too much open innovation, initially in mortgage financing, later on in financial instruments that were synthetically derived from such as collateralized debt obligations, where people no longer had an insurable interest but were nonetheless able to buy effectively insurance bets on events, and these things quickly multiplied to many times the size of the entire world economy. And so the regulators in the public sector really could not keep up with the explosion of innovation in these financial products.
So what you say is more closed innovation.
I think in this case I would say it's important for the public sector and the private sector and the financial community to have more of a balance. I think the financial community went way beyond what the regulatory infrastructure could support. And so the private sector alone could lead us down that path. So if we're designing a new currency,
yes,
to your question directly, we're going to very much need a public component of this, in part to harness that innovation so it's socially productive rather than spiraling out into things that become unproductive.
Very interesting. Questions, please? Yes, the mic is coming.
Hello, my name is Teodora Secara. I work for EURISI, a non-profit association of European space agencies. My question is open innovation is a bit counterintuitive. It promotes the idea that you should open up your company in the hope of getting more out of doing just that. However, a lot of companies are reluctant to do that because they're protectionist. It's the first intuition to have. How do you strike a balance? As a company, what should you have in mind when you open up to counterbalance the risk of having your ideas stolen from you or losing them just? Thank you.
Well, you're correct in your question that I think many companies see open innovation as a threat, losing control, having people steal things from you. The organizations that have found open innovation to be very effective and successful have done things like what you saw with BP, where they're doing a lot of investment in the public sector to drive and contribute to the fundamental changing knowledge in biology and life sciences and agriculture. And a lot of that is going to go to the whole world. And so you might think, well, gee, they're just being altruistic fools because everybody's going to take the knowledge and steal it from them. But of course, they've got a mechanism of their own to capture some of this. But even in the open part, who's going to see this work first? Who's going to have the knowledge first? Well, they will. So on the one hand, you can attract some of the best people in the world to work on these problems because it is being done in the open. So you will get world-class scientists working on these problems. And you get to watch.
We have to take the next question.
I'm David Hammerstein from the Transatlantic Consumer Dialogue. On open innovation, I have a few questions. I'm a bit perplexed.
Pick one, because we want to let other questions in too.
Is this compatible with unlimited waves of IPR, intellectual property enforcement, like we're seeing with new laws on both sides of the Atlantic? One. Number two, is this compatible without regulation to assure interoperability and common standards? And the third one is, can public research invest massively on publicly financed research, invest massively in private companies without having rules to guarantee access to data, clinical trials, sharing? Thank you very much.
Yes.
Yes, no.
I was just thinking the same, yes. We're, in the 3 o'clock session, we're going to talk more about the patent and IP stuff. So I'll remind you of that session. But in general, I would say that if open innovation involves collaboration, and often between the lab and the market, multiple parties playing roles along that journey. So a certain amount of IP can be quite helpful and even necessary for allowing, let's say, a new drug to start from a university, go into a small startup, and then later into a large pharma as it gets to market. It's important to have some level of IP in all of those cases.
But that sounds very conventional, doesn't it?
Yes?
Yes.
And then, on the other hand, when you have the government funding the research, as you point out, the public disclosure of that research, and indeed any potential conflicts of researchers engaging in that research. Very important to have that in the open. And in the open data idea, we're arguing not just in the government-funded work conducted in universities, but government data itself from its own operations should be surfaced and shared as well.
So one more question, yes?
Hello, my name's Keith Simons. I work with about 100... Can you hear me? Yes. My name's Keith Simons. I work with about 120 million euros of open innovation projects. And where I come into most conflict with the academics and the industrialists is over target setting. I was just wondering, do you have a view of target setting, and should it cause conflict? Should I pull them out of the comfort zone and have targets? Is it a good or a bad thing?
Tell me what you mean by target setting.
So, what do the industrialists want to achieve? What do the academics, what can they strive for? Will they know they've actually achieved the results when it's there? Getting people to talk about targets at the very beginning causes all sorts of conflict.
Well, one of the things that I think has worked well, and where I've seen it, is allowing the university to do what it does best, which is curiosity-driven science, trying to advance the frontiers of knowledge, where budgets and schedules aren't particularly useful in driving that. But once you get to some interesting results, if those people can then be allowed to spend some portion of their time working with, transferring knowledge, collaborating with the folks in industry, then that knowledge can then be further transformed, further advanced. Now schedules and budgets become necessary and even useful to that work. But then you're changing your hats. The university is no longer, professor is no longer being a professor. Now they're being an advisor, a consultant, something else instead.
Time is running. I have a final question, which is related to this issue. How do you see Europe embracing the science power of China and the open innovation, perhaps, of China?
I tend to be optimistic in the longer term about the contribution of China in both basic science and even in innovation in the following sense. For those of us who've been to Taiwan back many years ago, there was a period where Taiwan was a very full of IP pirates, you might say, where you could buy movies and all kinds of things very, very cheaply. But 40 years later, if you go back to Taiwan, you'll find that they protect intellectual property as well as anywhere in the world. What changed? What changed is is the reason I'm hopeful for China, and that is there's arisen in Taiwan a group of companies that now have a very strong internal technology base that they want to protect from other Taiwanese companies stealing their stuff. And I think in China we're seeing the emergence now of some very strong technology companies who are going to want the same kind of protections from their technology. And as those companies in turn try to sell globally to the EU and other parts of the world, they're going to have to adhere to the WTO, the WIPO, and these other institutional mechanisms. And I think that's going to create a positive, virtuous circle that's going to create stronger technology protections, which in turn I think will foster better collaboration. So, as you hear, there's so much to say on this subject, so I encourage you to go to the session and ask more questions and find out more about your tremendous intelligence. So thank you very much for coming. Excellent.
Very good. So now you have to go to other session, and at 5 o'clock you are welcome back here again.